They thought he was just another homeless kid under the bridge. Torn shoes, ragged hoodie, a mother stirring oatmeal on a camp stove. But when he picked up a broken pencil and asked, "Can I try?" the world would never see him the same again. The train thundered overhead like a steel god, its wheels shrieking against the tracks with a sound that echoed through the underpass. Every half hour it came, loud, unapologetic, and unchanging. For 8-year-old Raymond Clark, that rumble was more than noise. It was a clock, a reminder. You're not where you're supposed to be. Yet. Beneath the bridge, where the city forgot to look, Raymond lived with his mother in a patched-up tent stitched together with plastic sheeting and scavenged hope. It wasn't warm. Not really. The temperature had barely scraped past 40 degrees that morning, and the damp from last night's rain made the air feel colder than it was. Raymond pulled his hoodie tight, its sleeves too short for his growing arms. His mother, Tanya, knelt beside a battered camp stove, coaxing heat from a half-empty canister of fuel. The oatmeal she stirred with a plastic spoon bubbled slowly in a scratched tin pot. No sugar, no milk, just oats and water. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Almost ready, baby," she said, rubbing her hands over the steam. "Eat fast before it goes cold." Raymond didn't answer. He was crouched beside the tent, his back against a shopping cart, a tattered book open on his lap. Not a comic, not a coloring book, but an ancient, water-warped copy of basic algebra and introductory equations. One page was torn, the spine long gone, but he read it like treasure. And next to the book, taped together from old ramen noodle wrappers and a cereal box, was his whiteboard. On the back, scrawled in neat columns, were formulas, quadratic equations, factorizations, square roots, and a few of his own symbols. He had no toys, no friends, no school for the last 4 months. But numbers didn't tease him. They didn't move away when he got too close or whisper behind his back. Numbers obeyed. They had rules, logic, fairness, which is why, when other kids looked for scraps of food, Raymond looked for discarded college textbooks. Behind the community college cafeteria, near the dumpsters, there were always things people threw away. Yogurt, torn pages, even an old TI-84 calculator that he fixed with tape and spare batteries from a broken flashlight. That was his playground. He was enrolled at Emerson Elementary, but his last clean shirt was 2 months ago, and the last time he showed up, he'd been sent home for hygiene. The school counselor had said he should focus on stability first. Raymond had nodded politely, but he didn't go back, because school didn't feel safe. But learning still did. That morning, while the oatmeal cooled, he crouched beside the tent, reworking an equation he had found scratched in chalk on the back of a donation box behind the math department. It didn't look like any homework he'd seen. Too complicated, but something about it called to him. He was still scribbling when he heard tires crunch over gravel. A van. White. Lettering on the side. St. Jude's Community College, Mobile Learning Unit, Math for the Streets Outreach Program. Raymond blinked, the pencil hovering mid-air. 2 men and a woman stepped out of the van, pulling folding tables and signs. They were volunteers, fresh-faced, overdressed for the cold, their clipboards clipped and smiles firm. Behind them, a few unhoused kids began to gather, drawn by the promise of free snacks and something that sounded like school. Raymond froze. He didn't like groups. They talked too much, looked too long. But he stayed near the column, watching. One of the volunteers, a red-haired guy in a beanie, clapped his hands. "Okay, everyone, we've got a challenge for you. One lucky solver gets a gift card to Burger Town. That got a few cheers. Raymond's stomach grumbled at the mention of hot food. The beanie guy pulled out a sheet and waved it in the air. This problem stumped even a Cambridge professor during his guest lecture. Think you can beat him? The crowd laughed. Yeah, right, someone snorted. Like any of us could do that. But something in Raymond's chest buzzed. He had heard that name, Cambridge, once, when a retired professor at the soup line had given him a book and told him to dream bigger than this bridge. Raymond had gone home that night and drawn imaginary schematics of how to sneak into a lecture. Now a problem from that world was here. He stepped from the shadows, silent, thin, shoes patched with tape, hoodie 3 sizes too big. Can I try? He asked. There was a beat of silence, then laughter, loud and sharp. Look out! The bridge genius is here! Someone called. Yo, bro, you forgot your chalkboard! Another jeered, pointing at the ramen wrapper. Raymond didn't look at them. He just reached for the paper. His fingers were shaking slightly as he crouched on the sidewalk. The pencil he used was broken in half, but the tip still worked. That's all that mattered. The problem was massive. Layered equations nested inside radical expressions. Variables wrapped in logarithmic coefficients. A twisted monster of math that begged to be untangled. 17 minutes passed. No one noticed the silence at first. Then they did. One by one, the volunteers stopped talking. Even the kids teasing him started watching. Raymond hadn't looked up. His lips moved once, whispering numbers under his breath. Then he paused. His hand moved faster, then slower, then stopped. He took a breath, wiped the pencil smudge from the paper with the side of his sleeve, and handed it to the red-haired man. The guy took it with the kind of expression you give to a drawing from a toddler. Encouraging, polite, ready to say, nice try. But then he read the first line, and his eyes widened. This can't be right, he muttered. He flipped to the back. Wait, is this a parameterized inversion? Another volunteer leaned over. Dude, that's not even a technique undergrad students use. Where did he learn that? The redhead fumbled for his phone. I need to send this to someone. Like now. He snapped a photo and hit send. Across the ocean, in an office lined with chalkboards at Cambridge, Professor Brandon Hales was sipping tea when the image arrived. He froze mid-sip. Because it wasn't just a solution. It was the solution. Elegant, efficient, and utterly original. He reread the signature scrawled on the bottom of the page, RC. An hour later, he replied, Where did you find this? Who solved this? This isn't just a solution, it's a new method. I'm booking the next flight to New York. Immediately. None of the volunteers knew what to say. Raymond had already wandered back to the tent, poking the oatmeal that had now gone cold. His mother looked up from the pot. Did you talk to them? Raymond shrugged. I just tried something. He didn't know that by morning, his name would be on the lips of one of the world's top mathematicians, or that the man whose lecture he once tried to eavesdrop on would soon be standing in line at a shelter just to meet him. He only knew one thing. Numbers made sense. Even when life didn't. They laughed when he stepped forward in duct-taped shoes, called him a joke. But when he handed in his solution, the laughter stopped. Because genius doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up, even under a bridge. Raymond didn't expect silence. Not from them. The kids who mocked his clothes. The adults who pitied with their eyes. The volunteers who smiled too wide and listened too little. But silence is exactly what he got. 17 minutes after crouching on the cold concrete curb, broken pencil clutched in his fingers like a weapon forged in hardship, he finished. No flourish, no celebration, just one slow exhale and a single sentence. Here. The volunteer with red hair, Jesse, his name tag said, took the paper with an encouraging nod, already preparing to say something like, "Good effort, buddy." But as his eyes scanned the first few lines, his expression shifted from polite to puzzled, then stunned, then almost panicked. He crouched, right there on the curb, flipping through the steps Raymond had written. Symbols, clean, logic, tight, and in the middle of it all, a solution pathway that veered into unknown territory. Not wrong, not wild, just new. Jesse didn't even look up as he fumbled for his phone. "Don't move," he said, barely breathing. Raymond blinked. "Why?" I need to send this, right now." Within seconds, the solution had crossed the Atlantic, landing in the inbox of Professor Brandon Hales, a man so steeped in academic prestige that his lecture slides were cited before they were even published. The problem he had shared 2 years ago had turned into a legend, a riddle no one could quite untangle. Until now. The professor was in his study, flipping through grant proposals when the message pinged. He opened it absent-mindedly, then reread it, then dropped his teacup. Porcelain shattered. The tea stained his floor, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on one phrase in Jesse's email. Solved by an 8-year-old in New York. Homeless. No formal schooling. Hales leaned forward, breath caught in his throat. His finger hovered over the reply button. He typed, "Where is this boy? I want to speak to him. This isn't just clever. It's foundational. This could change the way we approach nonlinear parametric design. I need to meet him. I'm flying out immediately." Back under the bridge, Raymond had no idea any of that had happened. To him, it was just numbers, and numbers were comfort. The volunteers packed up early, too distracted to finish the planned activities. One whispered, "Did you see that method? That's PhD-level thinking." Another said, "I couldn't even follow the steps halfway through." Raymond sat on the curb again, tucking his book under his arm, preparing to fade back into invisibility. But Jesse crouched beside him. "Hey," he said gently, "where'd you learn to do that?" Raymond shrugged. "Nowhere. Just figured it out." "By yourself?" Raymond nodded. "Sometimes there's patterns. You just have to stare long enough. The numbers, they kind of talk back, if you let them." Jesse didn't know what to say to that. He just stared at the boy, shoelaces mismatched, hoodie frayed at the cuffs, and wondered how the world had almost missed him. And then came the second email. Jesse's phone buzzed. He opened it. His jaw dropped. "Tell the boy I'm coming. And tell him his solution just rewrote part of a theory I've been chasing for 12 years. 6 hours later, at JFK International Airport, a tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped into the arrivals terminal, pulling a worn briefcase behind him. He didn't wait for a limo, didn't check into a hotel. He just asked for directions to the St. Jude's outreach shelter. Because brilliance doesn't care about credentials. It doesn't care about housing status or how many holes are in your shoes. It shows up where it's least expected. And the world had just woken up to the fact that under a bridge in the Bronx, a genius had been hiding in plain sight. He came looking for a prodigy. What he found was a boy with no desk, no classroom, and no teacher. Just a heart full of numbers and a world that almost forgot to notice. The professor didn't find Raymond by an address. There was no address, no doorbell to ring, no school records to consult, no parents listed in an academic database. There was only a name, RC, scrawled at the bottom of a page that could change the future of mathematical modeling, and a city. That would have stopped most people, but not Professor Brandon Hales. He started at the shelter, St. Jude's, where the volunteers had come from. When he arrived, his Oxford-cut coat and polished shoes stood out like a sore thumb among the battered sneakers and plastic bags. But he didn't flinch when a man with a cart full of cans shouted, "You lost, Professor?" "No," Hales said. "I'm here to find someone." The director of the shelter, Ms. Arroyo, met him with cautious curiosity. "You're looking for Raymond? Little guy, hoodie 2 sizes too big? Does math on ramen boxes?" "Yes," Hales said, his voice low with anticipation. "Where is he?" She pointed toward the east end of the overpass. "Last I saw, he was walking toward the rail bridge, tents under the 3rd support column." Hales walked there himself, past food trucks, past people sleeping under blankets, past eyes that had seen too many broken promises, and then he saw it. The tent. Blue tarp, a fold-out chair beside it, and a girl sitting with a hunk of cardboard on her lap, chewing the end of a crayon. She looked up as he approached. The professor noticed the numbers scrawled across her cardboard. Square roots, decimals, something that looked like an attempt at graphing slope-intercept form. "Where did you learn that?" he asked gently. "My brother," she said, smiling. He pointed to the initials in the corner. "Did he write this?" "Yeah, RC. That's Ray. He teaches me sometimes." She paused. "Want to see his tent? I'd be honored." She led him through the maze of makeshift shelters until they reached the spot beneath the bridge. A boy crouched beside a crate, scribbling furiously onto a flattened cereal box with what looked like eyeliner. Raymond didn't look up. He was working a multivariable expression, lips moving with each calculation. The professor didn't speak. He didn't want to interrupt the rhythm. But when Raymond paused and said softly, "You're standing where the sun hits my numbers," Hales smiled. "Apologies," he said, stepping aside. "You must be Raymond Clark." Raymond finally looked up. His eyes were wary. Not afraid, just cautious, like someone used to strangers bringing questions, but never solutions. "I'm Professor Brandon Hales," the man said. "Cambridge. I'm the one who wrote the equation you solved." Raymond blinked. "Oh, that was your handwriting?" "Yes. And it's also your solution that's going to help me finish something I started 12 years ago." Raymond tilted his head. "I just saw the pattern." "No," Hales said firmly. "You created a pattern. Something new. Something that rewrites how we approach parametric reduction in multidimensional analysis." Raymond shrugged. "I thought it looked kind of pretty, actually." The professor chuckled, not at him but in admiration. "Pretty. That's not a word most mathematicians use for nonlinear variable sets." "Then they're doing it wrong," Raymond said quietly. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about school, not about poverty, not even about his living situation. Just math. Pure, joyful math. Symbols, possibilities, proofs. A language they both spoke fluently, though one had a PhD and the other had only the back of a ramen box. When the sun started to drop behind the overpass, Hales stood. "You don't belong here, Raymond." Raymond shrugged again. "It's where we ended up." "No," the professor said gently. "It's where the world left you. But that ends today." By the following week, the first steps were already in motion. The City University of New York offered a remote scholarship program tailored to Raymond's level, which, to everyone's amazement, exceeded even their honors students. A temporary housing voucher was arranged through a joint foundation started by alumni from Hales's department. Tanya, Raymond's mother, cried silently in the corner of the office when they signed the papers. "I didn't think anyone would ever look at my boy like he was worth more than a backpack full of books," she whispered. "He's worth more than you know," Hales replied. 2 months later, a news segment aired on national television. "Bridge Boy Genius Gets Global Recognition." The headline showed a photo of Raymond, holding a thick research textbook with one arm, his other hand resting on the shoulder of Professor Hales. But when a journalist asked Raymond during an interview, "What did you feel when you realized how special you are?" he didn't hesitate. "I always knew," he said. "You just didn't."